What's up everybody? Today we are dialing in a light roasted coffee on the Gaggia Classic. We're going to talk about, among other things, how to avoid very sour tasting espresso. There's a bit of technique involved, but I mostly want to talk about how to adjust the recipe as we taste this coffee, as well as introduce two inexpensive upgrades to the Gaggia that take less than 5 minutes to install, and once they're in, require basically nowhere to get more consistent and better tasting shots out of your setup. I'm gonna go ahead and prep the first shot, which is gonna be 18 grams in, aiming for 40 grams out in about 25 to 30 seconds. Of course, we're gonna temperature surf. And since the scale doesn't fit, I actually just take the drip tray out, throw that under there. All right, so we got 39.4 grams in 26 seconds. So right around where I was expecting, a little bit on the low end. So let's give this a little bit of a taste. Okay, so this first shot is not really that bad. There's a lot of heavy dark chocolate, but there's a little bit of bitterness too that I'm not super thrilled with. I'd like to get a little bit more sweetness out of this. I think I'm actually gonna change the grind at all, but I'm gonna pull it a little bit longer. That way I'm gonna get a little bit more clarity and hopefully pull out a little bit more of those florals, a little bit of those browning sugars. As I'm tasting it now, there's a little bit of sourness, so I'm thinking a little bit higher output, give me a little bit more extraction, give me a little bit more of that sweetness that I'm looking for. But what if you just pulled a shot within these parameters and you're not really sure what to do after tasting it? Well, my advice would be to pull another shot without making any changes. And if it's the same, then that's actually great news because it means that you're doing a consistent job at preparing your espresso, which is honestly half the battle. And if the second shot is quite different, then there's likely something going on to create channels which make your espresso pretty inconsistent. And this can be problematic because if you make adjustments, you may just end up properly extracting part of the espresso while other parts remain sour. Or if you go too fine, which happens sometimes, there isn't enough water flowing through most of the bed. That makes for a very concentrated, salty and sour shot, which might be confused for over-extracted because of the longer overall shot time. But extraction works on sort of a curve. At the lower end of grind size and extraction time is under extraction because there just isn't enough contact time and surface area to pull all the good stuff out of the coffee. And at the opposite end, there's plenty of surface area from the finer grind, but there's so much resistance that the water can't flow through the bed as effectively, resulting in, again, actually under extraction. It's somewhere just to the right of center that coffee is bitter and over-extracted, and a small window in the middle where everything is properly extracted, and that's where tasty coffee lives. So let's pull the second shot and talk a bit about the two upgrades that I think will help get you into this tasty window a lot more often. Okay, so that actually went up to 48 in about 29 seconds. So I'm gonna let that sit for a second. Already I'm getting a little bit more floral, a little bit more, nuance out of this coffee. A lot less of the bitterness right up front, which is great. But as it's cooling, I wanna talk about the two accessories that I've added to this Gaggia. To help me get more even and tasty extractions more often, I've actually replaced both the shower screen and basket in this with IMS Precision variants. And what this does is help make sure that there's an even flow of water heading into the coffee as well as heading out of the coffee, assuming that your puck prep is consistent. And the price of these fluctuates a bit, but at the time of recording, the two together cost me about $50. However, if you're only going to get one, I would get the basket. I've pulled shots on this machine next to my rocket using the same basket, and the shots were almost indistinguishable despite the rocket's $1,800 price tag. All right, so this has been sitting here cooling a bit. Let's give it another taste and see if going with a higher yield was the right move. So yes and no. Yes, I think texturally, it's way better. I like the texture a lot more. I like the way the mouthfeel is. I think the longer shot is the way to go, but there's still a bit of sourness in there. So I'm gonna take the grind just a tiny bit finer and see what that does. I think it's gonna bring out a little bit more complexity and get rid of that kind of sourness that is kind of creeping in there. We're not really at like that high in terms of time, so I'm not really expecting it to be kind of over the hump as far as being so over extracted that it's going in the other direction. So let's grind a little bit finer and see how this last shot is. And for this last shot, I'd like to show you my puck prep, which might be different from yours, and that's fine. As long as it's consistent, meaning you can pull shots back to back that behave and taste roughly the same, then you're in good shape. So starting off with RDT to minimize static and try and get as low retention as possible. I have this little dosing cup set up, sort of like the Baratza ESP, and I'm just kind of double checking the weight right here, making sure I have 18 grams. Give it a little shake inside the portafilter. WDT to distribute. And then this last bit, some people might find a little controversial, but I have this wedge set up so it is as deep as a tamper would be. And then I just spin it until it goes flush. It gives enough compression so that I get nice tasty shots without having to tamp. I actually find this to be really consistent, and after having spent many years on bar, it's nice to not have to worry about straining my wrist. Okay, so the last shot was 32 seconds, and we got 45 grams out. So this has a lot more body, it has a lot more clarity. It's got plenty of acidity, which I really like. Honestly, I've been happy with all three of these shots, but I think that this is my favorite one so far. So I'm gonna leave it there for now, and I hope you found this guide helpful. I try to share as many best practices and techniques as I can, as well as some tools and upgrades that I think are worth it. But really, there's always plenty to learn before committing to any new pieces of equipment. Sort of like learning to play guitar. A Fender Squire will suit most beginners just fine, and they really won't sound any better on an American-made Strat until their skills level up to take advantage of all the goodness that that better piece of kit has to offer. And if you're wanting to pick up some more espresso skills, you may want to check out one of these videos right here. Until next time, take care. Better tasting shots out of your setup. Da, 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 da.